Okay, we're continuing with the book Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes by me, Pete Rogers. We're alphabetical order. We're doing Ronald Reagan. He was a former USA president. He's of Irish descent. President in the 1980s, back when America was super rich. People used to go to college in California for free. College for free. That's what happens back in the good old days when you have, a Christian president and you have a, real, closer to real capitalism, laissez-faire capitalism. Okay, when he was governor of California before that, California was so rich. It was like a super rich country. Now that California has been turned over to collectivism, California is a third world crap hole with desperate poverty. It's been destroyed. Okay, I used to live in California. It was so rich, it's not even funny. Back in the good old days. I can tell you, I used to hear my dad and all these friends talking how they loved Ronald Reagan. They all became rich. Okay, back in those days, women didn't work. They didn't have to work. People were rich. My father became so wealthy from Ronald Reagan. He not only supported everything with his family, and my mom didn't have to work. He paid for my one of my uncles died. Okay, he died from a cardiac cath. They had a dissection of a coronary artery. My father paid for his kids to go to college. What I'm trying to say is that's how wealthy America was back in those days. Anyways, Ronald Reagan, he was a good president. He probably got demented from hypoperfusion, after he had the blood loss, from what happened to him from Hinckley. That's the whole Jack Delatour theory of cerebral hypoperfusion as a mechanism to cause dementia. All right, so here's a couple lines from Ronald Reagan. When he was going against Walter Mondale in one election, he said, "There you go again." And the way he did, he was funny. He was a great speaker. Watch him speak. He's one of the greatest presidential speakers you'll ever see. He was sort of pleasant and charming. He's an actor. He's a good-looking, charming, witty guy before he, had the hypoperfusion injury. Okay, he says, a recession is when your neighbor loses his job. A depression is when you lose your job. And recovery is when Jimmy Carter loses his. Russia is the evil empire. He was very anti-communist. He said, within the covers of the Bible are the answers for all the problems that men face. I have noticed that everyone who is for AB, Ort, and then Shin, has already been born. Government is not the solution to our problem. It is the problem. It does not solve problems. It subsidizes them. Either you will control your government or your government will control you. Back in 1927, an American socialist, Norman Thomas, who was 6 times candidate for president on the Socialist Party ticket, said the American people would never vote for socialism. But, he said, under the name of liberalism, the American people will adopt every fragment of the socialist program. Yeah, that's true. I've seen that. I even have people on the Irish side of my family. They're so stupid. They're Irish Catholics, and they call themselves Democrats. It's like, how can you be a Democrat and be a Christian? It's like the goal of the Democratic Party is, American Communist Party, to get rid of all Christians. Okay, it's like they're so stupid. I feel sorry for them. That's what I meant by Puerto Rican Christianity is better than Irish Christianity, because a lot of the Irish, they're pseudo-intellectuals. They don't really know what they're talking about. They just say and do one stupid thing after another. Whereas the Puerto Ricans, they might not read the Bible that much, but their heart's in the right place and they don't behave so stupidly. All right, Ronald Reagan continues. He says, without God, democracy will not and cannot long endure. Yeah, without God, to sort of unify people around the morals of Christ, you're going to have a free-for-all of different groups all kind of squabbling with each other, and then brute force is going to be used to just make them shut up and obey a bunch of really strict rules. It's obvious. And eventually, slavery. I mean, it's just like, to me, this is like 2 + 2 = 4. Because most people, they don't know any history. They're all emotional ignoramuses. They don't get this. Nothing could be more obvious than this. Okay, Ronald Reagan continues. Evil is powerless if the good are unafraid. If we ever forget that we're one nation under God, then we will be one nation gone under. Yeah, when I was a kid in school, we would say the Pledge of Allegiance, I pledge allegiance to one nation under God. We did that. We also talked about the melting pot. USA was a melting pot. Whatever country you came from, you're now an American. Okay? I didn't say I was a Puerto Rican American. I didn't say I was an Irish American. I was an American. Everybody was like that. That's how it was. We were all Americans. And my mother from Puerto Rico, she didn't say, oh, make sure you say you're Hispanic American. She said, no, forget about Puerto Rico. You're in America now. You're so lucky to be in America now. America is the greatest country. Everybody had this attitude. America is the best, okay? And anything else, like Russia was just third world commie crap hole. Like Reagan called it the evil empire. We was like, yeah, they're Russian commie scums. That's how we thought of them. We did. We thought everybody was just lowlifes compared to America. And you know what? That was a good way for America to be. It was rich and successful. Now America is like, hey, we can be a third world crap hole too. Okay, let us continue with Ronald Reagan quotes. He says, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on to them for them to do the same. Those who have known freedom and then lost it will never know freedom again. If we lose freedom here, there will be no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth for freedom. Okay, Reagan continues. He says, the time has come to turn to God and reassert our trust in Him for the healing of America. Our country is in need of and ready for a spiritual renewal. Okay, so that's good stuff, Ronald Reagan. Okay, the next one, Ernest Renan. He's an author. He might be French. I'm not sure about that. He says, the highest goal of mankind is the liberty of the individual. Okay, now here's the next quote, the scary one. The greatest men of a nation are those it puts to death. So that's kind of scary. And there's actually a lot of truth in that. Because the greatest men, they often have a solid backbone and they're Christian and they say and do what's right. And then the ruler says, hey, shut up. Psh. So, anyways, next we're going to do a French writer, Jules Renard. He lived from 1864 to 1910. And I love this first quote. Here, you ready? This is a masterpiece. You might want to click print screen for this one. He says, love is like an hourglass. When the heart fills, the mind empties. The amazing thing to me is how women can manipulate a man so much, you know. You're sort of like your little girlfriend, little sweet little thing, and all of a sudden she's bossing you around and making you do stuff, and you're like, how did she get me to do all that stuff? And they're very good at manipulating the relationship. Because, you know, the man, he's thinking about work, he's thinking about his hobby, he's thinking about dinner, going to sleep, exercise. She's thinking about how to control the relationship. They're good at it. Okay, here's another great quote by Jules Renard. Life is not all that we want it to be, but it is all that we have. That's a good one. Because a lot of people, they get sad because something's not going their way. And it's sort of like, okay, sure, you're sad, but, you know, you also got a lot to be grateful for. And don't forget that. All right. Jules Renard, he continues. He says, the people's theater, what nonsense. Call it the aristocrats' theater, and the people will come. Don't tell a woman she's pretty. Tell her that there's no other woman like her, and all roads will be open to you. To be bored is an insult to yourself. Writing is the only profession where no one considers you ridiculous if you earn no money. Talent is a matter of quantity. Talent does not write one page, it writes 300. Now, it kind of depends on how you phrase that. Some people will talk about, you know, talent versus no talent or talent versus genius. But I think there's a little truth in the idea that you have to crank stuff out. And this almost reminds me of quotes like, the best way to have a great idea is to have a lot of ideas. That's sort of like a Linus Pauling quote. I actually think that it's different. You know, genius is more like what's the big secret of genius from what I've seen is that, look at all these doctors. I'll know 1,000 doctors and not a single one will ever write a book. And you say to yourself, why is it? A lot of them are very intelligent, really high IQs. And the reason is simple if you know them. They only read the conventional medical books. And if you only read the conventional medical books, it's already answered the questions that it's willing to address. It only happens when you start reading outside of the conventional medical books and the conventional journals that you realize the conventional medical books and journal are a joke, a farce. But you have to read outside, and almost no one ever does. The reason is, by the time you get done taking all your training, your residency, your fellowship, finishing your boards, by then you're tired. Then you got to work long hours to make partner. Then you want to have a baby at home with the wife, the spouse, and then you're up late with the baby. You're exhausted. So most doctors don't ever really read medical stuff again, other than to, you know, renew their boards or something. So they never, ever go into the nutritional literature, the toxicology literature, the alternative medical literature, etc., the pathophysiology literature related to, you know, adjacent topics like dentistry, etc. So they're not at all aware of this. The smartest ones, the top of their classes, they're not aware of any of this stuff. But once you start reading it, it's like, you don't have to be that smart. You just have to know it. And you're like, well, gee, this is obvious, okay? The incidence of hypertension amongst the Kenyans in 1929, it's zero. The Tarahumara, it's essentially zero. The Yanomami, it's essentially zero. And once you see all that, you're like, wow. Anyways, okay, let's continue with Jules Renard quotes. He says, when I think of all the books that I want to read, I am certain of a future happiness. Okay, I hope you found those helpful.